Fear the government that fears your gun, because the government is not engaged in a war on crime. It is engaged in a war on liberty. Government is engaged in a massive propaganda campaign aimed at hiding the fact that it is failing. Booze, drugs, and guns are all inanimate objects. They have no conscience. They can take no action in and of themselves. They make no decisions. In the real world, wars are waged not against inanimate objects. Wars are waged against people. And people, many of them innocent people, are the ones who die. Also killed in the process are the essential liberties, the heart and soul of what the founders of this country sought to establish. Many unwitting citizens have been conned by the government's propaganda into yielding their liberties to the government in the name of public safety. And I think Waco played a big part in that. That, my friends, is a one-way street. Ben Franklin said that the man who will trade liberty for security shall in the end have neither. Governments can take away your rights. They seldom, if ever, give them back. The cloak of public safety is an alluring garment, but the fit is ever tighter and difficult at best to remove. Once that liberty is gone, you can't get it back without a fight. One of the political philosophers who heavily influenced the thinking of our nation's founders was the noted English jurist John Locke. Locke said, quote, "I have no reason to suppose that he who would take away my liberty would not, when he had me in his power, take away everything else." And your government will tell you a little liberty here and there is not going to ruin your life, and this is all for the common good. Again, pay more attention to what people do, not what they say. Your government also said that they were concerned about the welfare of Randy Weaver's children. So it shot one through the back, killing Sammy Weaver, and the next day shot Sammy's father and his friend, and then assassinated their mother in front of their other children. Janet Reno said she made her fateful decision that led to the massacre here 2 years ago out of concern for the Branch Davidian children. Those were her words, but it is her acts and the crimes of her agents that bring us here today. One of my favorite writers is Henry David Thoreau, and I picked a quote here because I think he must have been clairvoyant when he wrote this. He must have understood the true nature of modern federal law enforcement and its concept of child welfare. He wrote, "If you see a man approaching you with the obvious intent of doing you good, run for your life." This speaks to a much more far-ranging problem that has to be redressed, or else I foresee more violence and injustice in America of a much greater scale than even the Waco massacre. And that problem is the federal government's campaign to seize and consolidate new power over individuals as never before. Americans today, and I'm going to quote some stuff from a book by a friend of mine named James Bovard, who's a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. The book, if you want to get it, is called Lost Rights. And Jim writes that Americans today must obey 30 times as many laws as their great-grandparents had to obey at the turn of the last century. Federal agents publish an average of more than 200 pages of new rulings, regulations, and proposals in the Federal Register each business day. I'm not making this up. Jim Bovard's not making it up. Individual privacy is vanishing beneath the flood tide of government power. Government officials have asserted, and your representatives in Congress have aided and abetted, a de facto right to search almost anybody, almost any time, for almost any reason. And if the Waco raid is any indication, in any manner they see fit. Today, a citizen's right to privacy, even the ownership of the cash in your pocket, can be nullified by the sniff of a single floppy-eared hound dog. Army commandos, National Guard troops, and gang up to trample crops, shoot dogs, and scare the hell out of anyone in their way in their search for a politically incorrect plant that just a few decades ago the government was paying farmers a bounty for growing. They have twisted this phony war on drugs into lies to merge military tactics and personnel with civilian law enforcement, and that's what happened right here. Drugs and guns were the excuse to bring 90 armed agents and 4 Green Berets to attack a humble religious retreat that was home to scores of innocent women and children in a vain and foolhardy attempt to arrest one man with no criminal record for his failure to pay a federal firearms tax. As our leaders fail to lead, they tell us that they are helping us with each new law passed. But each new law and regulation diminishes the freedom of us all. As John Locke wrote, the end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. But in the 1990s, our lawmakers and law enforcement agents make the mistakes. We pay the cost in liberty, and this sham must end. Our politicians have sought to maximize social progress by maximizing the number of people labeled as criminals. These new criminal classes were not created through changes in people's behavior, but by politicians moving the line between legal and illegal behavior. And the more new crimes have been invented, the less the government has protected citizens against the old crimes. In Fayetteville, North Carolina, my family's hometown for just about since the lava cooled in that part of the country. On the same site that the state ratified the United States Constitution, there now stands in the middle of downtown traffic circle an old public market house. From the steps and balconies of this old market house, estate sales sometimes occurred in times past in which slaves would be sold and slave families thus broken up, their fates decided by the whimsy of a bidder's fancy. And as well as we all know, that was not only wrong, it was evil, and evil we paid for with the blood of hundreds of thousands of men. Today, your liberties and my liberties are put on the election block, and our rights are sold and bartered according to the latest political deal-making. In the same way that it is morally reprehensible for one person to buy or sell another person, it is also immoral for our elected representatives to auction off the liberties of U.S. citizens. We have paid dearly for idealizing the state. And that's what a lot of the opposition to us is all about. People want to buy the government's line. They want to believe what the government tells them. But there's no virtue in denying the law of gravity, because gravity is not just a good idea, it's the law. There should be no virtue in denying the limitations of government. Good intentions, Ms. Reno, are no excuse for perpetual failure and growing oppression. The more we glorify government, the more liberties we will lose. The time has come to face up to the pervasive failures of government, especially such monumental atrocities as the Waco massacre. We must not only take corrective measures, we must punish the guilty. The time has come to radically reduce, by whatever means necessary, the power of government officials to coerce, expropriate, and subjugate other Americans the way they tried, and I think they did, to the Branch Davidians, because of their religious beliefs or for any other reason. America needs fewer laws, not more prisons. By trying to seize far more power over our citizens than is necessary, the federal government is destroying its own legitimacy. It was a revolt against growing arbitrary power that sparked the first revolution in this country. And when I say revolution, I'm not just talking about the war with England that led to independence. The war was only the effect of the revolution. The revolution, John Adams tells us, was in the minds of the people. And revolt, and I've traveled a lot in this country in the months and the years since Waco and talked to a lot of people, and I'm confident of this. Revolt, or at least armed resistance, is on the minds and on the tongues of many people today precisely because of the government's refusal to be held accountable for the travesties of justice such as occurred on this hallowed ground. People, not just political extremists and social activists, but ordinary, hard-working people of the heartland who worship in mainstream churches, pay taxes, and consider themselves patriotic Americans, they have grown afraid of the federal government's power. They've realized it's dangerous to be right when the federal government is wrong. These are the same type of everyday folks who band together when the government authorities moved to confiscate firearms on April 19, 1775. The government was upset because male citizens had been organizing into independent paramilitary units. Does that sound familiar? The ordinary citizens who confronted the British soldiers at Lexington had no intention of fighting, and in fact had been ordered not to fire. And as often occurs in this kind of confrontation, there was a nervousness about the whole operation, and somehow someone fired a shot and started a war. We know who fired the shots that started the Battle of Mt Carmel, the ATF. They still deny it. But the initial statements of several ATF agents to Texas Rangers confirm it. Some of the Green Berets who trained the ATF for the Waco raid, whom I have interviewed, say nothing else was ever considered and nothing else was ever rehearsed, except what millions of people on TV saw, ATF agents trying to flashbang and shoot their way into a religious retreat. The ATF, of course, did not have a no-knock warrant, and the agents charging the front door had no warrant at all, had not read or even seen a warrant. That constitutional requirement was a small detail that the ATF overlooked. The Treasury Department report on Waco said they had no raid plan until 3 days before the raid. That too is a lie, one of many, and I have a classified Army document I've just written about, dated 25 days prior to the raid, in which an Army lawyer, Major Philip W. Lindley, Assistant JAG Officer for the Army Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, referred to the ATF's raid plan as part of the Army's evaluation of the ATF's training request. And Major Lindley's memo, for the record, indicates the ATF asked for the presence of Green Berets, and I quote, in proximity to the target, end quote. And at least 4 Green Berets were here that fateful day, and I'll tell you who they were: Sergeant First Class Chris Dunn, Staff Sergeants Warren Ackley, Bob Moreland, and John Wilson. And I'd like somebody to put these men under oath and ask them what they were doing here, where they were, and why they were here. Major Lindley